Namaskara. Uh, Thanks to the previous speaker who spoke in Kannada, I had the honor and privilege of Sri B.L. Santoshji playing the role of a translator. So I don't think quite a few people can actually boast of that particular achievement. So I'm grateful to B.L. Santoshji for giving me an opportunity to share space with him. I'm grateful to the Meru Foundation for coming up with this fantastic initiative and for giving me an opportunity to share space with all these brilliant creative minds. I honestly feel out of place because I don't know what I'm doing here, except for the fact that I realize that I know very little. And when each time I see someone speak proficiently in an Indian tongue, I regret knowing English equally proficiently. So I don't know what to make of it. Um in fact, I was having a conversation earlier in the evening with Amish Tripathi as to the importance of language and all that, and that it's a carrier of idiom, a carrier of history, a carrier of civilization. But most importantly, I think look at the natural confidence with which the earlier speaker spoke in her mother tongue. And I don't think anybody needed to teach her the art of oration, elocution, or whatever it is. And the confidence levels that we typically associate with speech in an alien tongue is overrated. It's seriously overrated. Maybe because partially there is a certain mindset which gives you the impression that there is something great going on, merely because the person happens to speak in a foreign language. But I've always found native speakers unmatched in their ability to enthrall the audience and the confidence with which they engage with the audience, because they're able to touch the pulse of the audience with their command and grasp over the native idiom, which I think is the essence of knowing a language and the culture that goes with it. I heard Sri Achyutaji's talk very keenly, and I'm very, very happy that finally the value of institutionalizing such initiatives is something that we are seeing in our life and time, because typically what has happened is that such initiatives have had heroic, valiant, lone attempts, where you have a lot of individuals putting in a lot of effort, but ultimately dying bitter, let's say, poor penury deaths. And here's a situation where a bunch of like-minded people have come together to actually save what they believe are the arts on the verge of extinction. According to me, Indic arts will see a resurgence simply because this very initiative tells me that the stars are aligning in favor of Indic arts and revival of Indic arts. And the reason I make this particular statement, and not because I wish to say this for the sake of public consumption, is because when a self-driven group of people come together and they realize that there is a lot that needs to be done, and they look for support from the society as opposed to support from the state, that indicates multiple things. One, that they clearly understand, or at least they know for a fact that they can put faith in the society's conscience to support that initiative. So that means that spirit of Indic consciousness is still alive in the society, notwithstanding the multiple waves of colonization that we have seen. In fact, as part of the book, I've spoken of the Islamic colonization, I've spoken of the Christian colonization. But I think the most pernicious colonization that this country has ever witnessed is the Nehruvian Marxist colonization. And the reason I think it's important to highlight that is because I think this culture and the civilization has suffered at the hands of its own people more than outsiders. And that happens to be the tragedy of our situation. And when I see that the first audience that we are having to convince, to persuade, to argue, to contest, and to debate is our own people, it clearly shows the advanced stage of decay of this particular situation. And let's say it's reached a very advanced situation where now the foreigner has succeeded in pitting you against your own brother, against your own sister, and you're having to convince the validity and the legitimacy of your culture and your existence, not to an outsider, but an insider who thinks like an outsider. So therefore, I'm very, very happy that this initiative has come about. Most importantly, as a lawyer, I think the buzzword that immediately caught my ears was the reference to the GI tag. I'm so happy that you spoke of it, because I think it's important to understand the value of documentation. It's unfortunate that we have come down to the level of documentation, because it points to a different thing altogether. All the arts that we have just seen being performed in front of us fundamentally showcase the strength of the oral tradition. the strength of the living oral tradition, and precisely because it happens to be an oral tradition, notwithstanding the number of libraries and institutions that have been burnt and razed to the ground, these traditions have survived. And therefore, the value of this oral tradition is something that is incomparable and it can't be measured. Not just that, when a society depends on an oral tradition, it points, according to me, to a very different issue altogether. One is that obviously we believe in the sanctity of the sound and its relationship with creation. So obviously there is a reference to Nada Brahmam on a regular basis whenever you emphasize on the importance and the power behind sound. But secondly, from sound it comes down to the tongue, which effectively means you understand the power of the tongue, and you also understand that any statement or word that you give, you are expected to maintain and preserve the integrity and sanctity of that word. Which is why when people say that Indians don't have a sense of history, Indians don't have a sense of documentation, I say no, we have actually put faith in honor codes. We have actually put faith in the integrity of the individual. And therefore, when someone makes a promise, we hope that the person will actually live up to the promise, whether or not that particular promise has been captured in writing. That is exactly why this particular civilization puts faith in oral tradition so much. But the reason that you're forced to actually document it is because you have now come under the influence of a certain culture which fundamentally believes that human beings are depraved, and unless and until there is something that is captured in writing, it is not possible to take that person's word seriously. So that shows the distinction between two cultures. One believes that human beings are fundamentally good and there is a repository of divine consciousness in them, and therefore you can put faith in them. The other believes that not just are you a flock of sheep, you're also born in the mold of a sinner in the first place, and therefore you need an external sanction, you need an external stick to keep you in line and to keep you in order. That is the distinction. So if at all there is a culture that actually respects the dignity of human beings and the value of individuals, it has to be this culture and not any other culture. This is extremely important for us to understand, because each time I speak of bringing back our own value systems, our own legal philosophies in practice, I keep getting this question over and over again. Don't you think that if a culture comes back, then the concept of social control is back? What do you do with individual rights? What do you do with rights of, let's say, women? What most people fail to understand is that women have gained rights in the West not because of their culture, but despite their culture, and precisely why they've needed feminist movements to assert their position in the society. You don't worship the feminine, you fundamentally think of her as having come out of an adjunct part of a male body. This is the kind of, let's say, treatment that you have starting from your scripture to your society. No wonder you've needed a feminist movement. So the absence of a feminist movement as far as Bharat is concerned is not proof of enslavement of women, but is the absence of the need for such a movement in the first place. When I make this particular statement, people end up asking me this question, then what do you make of child marriages? What do you make of the Parda system? Well, I'm sorry to say, blame the outsider. Blame the outsider. You have to blame the outsider, you have no other option. When you're dealing with a certain mindset which has no problems engaging in necrophilia, that is even after the body is dead, even after the person is dead, and which fundamentally does not see divinity in, let's say, a young girl, then you have no other option but to actually follow certain systems to protect your dignity. I am a fourth generation Hyderabadi Tamilian, and having lived under the Nizam, our family can certainly vouch for this particular fact. Because whether or not women of the other community were expected to wear the parda, women of the Hindu community had to wear the parda for the simple reason that if the Nizam's entourage was out in the streets, you never know which woman was going to be picked up. And therefore, parda was a requirement, was a compulsion. The reason I'm making all these points as part of this particular, let's say, session or this event, I think is that art will perform a much more powerful role in busting popular myths in young minds, much more than 1,000 books put together. It's unfortunate, it's really unfortunate that the Marxist side has actually understood the value of art as far as propagation of information is concerned, and it has effectively captured that particular space over the last 60, 70 years. And for a bunch of people to survive in such a toxic atmosphere and retain the optimism to come together to put together this initiative reflects not only their confidence in their own self, but also confidence in the civilization. So please give a round of applause to the people who have actually come out with this brilliant initiative. as someone who practices in a fraternity which follows the rule of the Indian traffic, which is keep left. Okay. So I know for a fact how difficult it is to actually survive in this toxic atmosphere. If that is the principle that is to be followed as far as my fraternity is concerned, in the realm of art, in the realm of culture, left is default right. Okay, so I believe that this effectively has revived, even if I say so myself. These initiatives are a reflection of the revival of the Indic spirit of resistance in its own forms in different planes, in different departments. So while Kshatriya is typically associated with a martial tradition, I believe that Kshatriya fundamentally represents a spirit of resistance. So anybody who's managed to come out with these self-driven, society-driven initiatives in such a toxic atmosphere is fundamentally living by the rule of the Kshatriya. So all of us are intellectual Kshatriyas in that particular sense. So kudos to you. I hope you have the support that you need from the society. And I'll go back to my pet peeve as part of this particular topic. I don't think I'll take more than 5 minutes. I'll just make this point. Precisely so that such initiatives are not entirely left to the munificence and goodwill of the society at large, because the society at large is an amorphous entity. You don't know where you're going to get the money from. You don't know who's going to commit resources to. The temple was meant to perform the role of patron of the arts. So therefore, a thriving, autonomous temple ecosystem is a better guarantor of such initiatives and their sustainability than the goodwill of indeterminate group of individuals. So for such initiatives to survive in the long run, I go back to my pet topic. Please free the temples. Please free the temples. And therefore, I believe that once the temples at least regain a semblance or a modicum of autonomy, these initiatives will only get orders of magnitude of support that they've always deserved, and we will be able to save such traditions and such art forms from being pushed to the brink and verge of extinction. I really hope that at least in my life and time and in my living memory, we get to see that particular goal being achieved. As I keep saying, that Hindu community certainly doesn't have the luxury of being pessimistic, so therefore I'm by default an optimist. And I therefore hope that this particular goal is achieved, so that the temple ecosystem and therefore the associated and allied ecosystems get the kind of support that they've always enjoyed in a traditional Hindu dharmic society. And we're able to push them forward, because you see, I don't see the point in dying a heroic death. I don't want to be a martyr under any circumstances. If you enter a certain battle, if you enter a certain initiative, I don't see the point in dying. I see the point only in doing. So I hope that while we certainly celebrate the martyrdom and the heroism of, let's say, our heroes, we ensure that this particular generation at the very least achieves victory in all possible realms, at every possible plane, in every department possible. Because I am sick and tired of having to listen to and read atrocity literature. I don't want to read that anymore. I hope that the next generation doesn't have to read that atrocity literature anymore. So I certainly want to assure this particular group that in terms of the legal support that you're going to need, you will certainly need. 100% you're going to need, simply because mud will be slung at you, allegations will be leveled at you. There will be every attempt possible to use every rule in the book to come after you. And history will be weaponized, and caste will be weaponized. Your individual castes will be identified, and they will say that this is Brahminical patriarchy at work. Okay? So this is going to happen. So I hope you also have a battery of lawyers by your side. While this may seem as a self-serving suggestion, I'm happy to render my services pro bono as far as your cause is concerned. Importantly, I think gradually this particular group must look at its own task at a slightly different level. Consider this as a suggestion. Whether this is ultimately possible or not, I leave it to your disposal and your resources, which is somewhere you must start looking at a role in policy making as far as the culture, Ministry of Culture is concerned. Simply because unless and until there is a policy level initiative, most of these initiatives will become just what they are, which is an island or an enclave. The idea is to create a multiplier effect, and the only entity that is capable of creating a multiplier effect is the state. So therefore, there must be an active interface. Second, please learn from the dare I say so, the civil liberties movement of the African American community in terms of protecting the integrity and the cultural nexus of our art systems and the religious nexus of our art systems so that they are not secularized and deracinated. Which means you must start looking at measures to prevent misappropriation, because not only are we looking at reclamation of what belongs to us, we must also ensure that what exists is not appropriated in the name of secularizing whatever exists. So it's important for us to do this. I say this based on my discussions with people who run the, let's say, the Kalari ashrams across the Konkan to the Malabar. I've been speaking to them and they tell me that now people have started opening Kalari ashrams where there is no velak, there is no lamp, there is no prayer, there is no representation of the Bhagavati there is no, let's say, a sacred spot. So gradually, the process of digestion has started taking over not just our political systems, our education systems, it has now moved to the realm of art and culture. So people want to learn Bharatanatyam without actually any obeisance being paid to Lord Shiva or let's say to Bharatamuni himself, so they want to do all of this. So I think this is one area where you can actually actively step into the picture. Perhaps put together a strong team of policy analysts, lawyers, and artists who come out with realistic proposals to actually protect this. As someone who has practiced intellectual property law for the last 12 years, ever since I set foot in legal practice, I have seen that Bharat's contribution to protection of traditional knowledge is negligible, abysmal, and minimal. We learnt our lessons primarily from the Basmati experience and the turmeric experience, but we haven't learnt our lessons in the realm of culture. And that is where there is a serious appropriation that's going on. Right from the use of Dhvajastambham for the purposes of construction of non-Hindu places of prayer, not worship, and appropriation of the color and whatnot, it will slowly move to this particular realm as well. So therefore, I think each of these initiatives will force Bharat to take a certain position as to what is the nexus between a certain culture and a certain art form. We have been trying to dodge that question because it's an uncomfortable question. We don't want to talk about it because we wallow under this particular belief. Art is meant to unify people. That seems like a one-way street at this particular point of time, because I don't think art is actually bridging the connections between people. Art is being used to divide people, because they are looking at, even in art, they are finding caste. Okay, so it has come to that point. So I would seriously suggest that apart from supporting traditional art forms and hopefully not so dying art forms and all these people, you also consider coming out with policy suggestions. And there are enough and more people in this country who will certainly volunteer to help you. And perhaps we should look at a certain point where India takes the lead in floating an international instrument for protection of indigenous art forms and for preventing its appropriation by those who do not share indigenous values. So this is something that I am perhaps giving it to you as some kind of a homework, something that you can have as part of your vision statement at some point. But on a positive note, I think this is a fantastic start, and there couldn't have been a better city to actually start this initiative. I'm not saying this to win the praise or the accolades of the audience, but every time I've come to Bangalore, no matter what the topic is, somehow the audience turns up. It's almost as if this place has become the intellectual hub of the country. So I think this is fantastic, simply because previously this was a position that was enjoyed by Kolkata, then it shifted to Chennai for some time. Delhi is trying its best, but I don't think that's going to happen, because the only culture at least that city understands is agriculture. So as far as I'm concerned, finally, this moving epicenter of intellectualism has come to the right place. Simply because this obviously happens to be the place of Krishnadeva who's managed to patronize so many arts and whatnot, so it has come to the right place. And the best part is this part of the country has managed to retain two things: its own individual identity, which is obviously associated with the Kannada language, but its openness to cosmopolitanism, and that's a very difficult balance to strike. That's a very, very difficult balance to strike, because it's possible to go overboard with language chauvinism and therefore close your mind to ideas and other cultures. it's possible to go overboard with cosmopolitanism and lose what belongs to you and your sense of self. So that beautiful balance and that sweet spot is something that this particular this city has somehow managed to retain, and I extend the same benefit to Mysore as well. So I hope it continues, and I hope to be a part of such wonderful events. I just enjoyed the performance. The 5 people who performed, it was fantastic, it was moving. I don't understand a word of it, but I think as I said, the sound has its own impact, and the sound reaches you whether or not you understand the language. So thank you for giving me an opportunity to be a part of such a fantastic event. More power to you. May Shiva, Parvati, and Vishnu bless you. Thank you.